Thursday, February 11, 2021. The record 2 p.m. Today we have President Vice Chair Senator Reinbold, Senator Costello, Senator Holland, Senator Kawasaki. I'm not sure. We'll see if he shows up. I know he was traveling. He may come up online, so we'll announce that if he does, and myself, Chair Shower. I would like to remind committee members and those in the audience, please silence your cell phones. Staff, we have assistant today are Terrence Shanigan, Committee Aide for State Affairs behind us, Carrie Cooper Ryder with Senate Records, and we've got Alex with the LAO behind us as well. So with that, welcome to State Affairs. We have one item on today's agenda. It's SB39 election integrity. Today we're going to be hearing invited testimony. We have 4 presenters, and we're just going to get started and rock right into it. The first one is Mr. Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation. He is appearing live via video conference. Mr. von Spakovsky, so I don't get that wrong, it's a tough one. We've spoken to you before, so thank you for taking the time to come join us today and tell us what you know. And when you're ready, if you go ahead and introduce yourself with first, last name, who you represent, and then the floor is yours. Thank you.
Very good. I appreciate the invitation very much to Mr. Chairman and members of the committee to testify today. I'm Hans von Spakovsky. I'm a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. I'm also manager of their election law reform initiative. I have a lot of experience in the election area. I've been a county election administrator in 2 different counties in 2 different states. I also served for 4 years at the Justice Department enforcing federal voting rights laws that protect the right to vote. I also spent 2 years at the Federal Election Commission as a commissioner. I do have to say the testimony I'm giving here today is in my personal capacity and not as a representative of the Heritage Foundation. It's critically important that states improve the integrity of our elections. The key principles for a fair election are access and security. That requires ensuring that every person who casts a ballot is legally eligible to vote, that every legally cast vote is counted, and that the entire process is open to observation by the public, the political parties, and the candidates. Transparency is a fundamental essential for a fair and secure voting and election system, as well as to maintain public confidence in the validity of every election. We want a system in which the public, the political parties, and the candidates of all the political parties, even when they lose, all agree that it was a fair process without errors, mistakes, or fraud, in which the individual who received the most votes was declared the winner. The fairest way to achieve that goal is by requiring individuals to authenticate their citizenship, identity, and residence when they register and when they vote, whether it's in person or through the absentee balloting process. And it's also essential that states maintain accurate, up-to-date voter registration rolls in which individuals who die, move away, or otherwise become ineligible do not remain on the voter rolls to cause confusion or to be taken care of. In 2012, the Pew Foundation actually issued a report on the voter registration system across the U.S. They estimated that there were 24 million voter registrations with significant errors. There were 1.8 million individuals who were dead who remained on the rolls, and there were 2.7 million registered in more than one state. In addition to errors and mistakes, election fraud does exist, and criminal penalties imposed after the fact are an insufficient deterrent. When Justice John Paul Stevens led the Supreme Court in upholding Indiana's voter ID law in 2008, he noted that examples of such fraud have been documented throughout the nation's history by respected historians and journalists. And not only is the risk of voter fraud real, but it could affect the outcome of a close election. And that, of course, is the key. The bipartisan 2005 report of the Commission on Federal Election Reform, which was headed by former Democratic President Jimmy Carter and former Republican Secretary of State James Baker, made exactly the same point, that it could make the difference in a close election. Look, no one claims that election fraud occurs in every election, but it does happen often enough that we should be concerned about it, particularly in close elections where a few votes could make the difference, like the 2008 congressional race in North Carolina's 9th district that was overturned by the State Board of Elections, after an in-depth investigation showed enough absentee ballot fraud to have changed the outcome of the race, and a new election was ordered. Or the city council race in Paterson, New Jersey, just last summer, in which the same thing happened. New election was ordered by a judge. 4 locals were charged with absentee ballot fraud because the fraud made a difference in the outcome of the election. Or another just quick example, the mayor of Gordon, Alabama, who in 2019 was removed from office after he was convicted, again, of absentee ballot fraud in a race he won by only 16 votes. I don't think I have to tell folks in Alaska about close elections where every vote can make a difference, given that the Speaker of your House, Bryce Edgmond, was elected after a coin toss in a tied election that included both a recount and a court challenge to disputed ballots. The Heritage Fraud database, which we started just a couple of years ago, has 1,311 proven cases of fraud. And by proven, I mean we don't put a case in there unless someone's been convicted in a court of law of engaging in fraud, or a court has ordered a new election because of fraud, or a state agency like the State Board of Elections in North Carolina has found fraud. By the way, this is just a sampling of cases. It is not a comprehensive list, and it includes at least 2 illegal aliens from Mexico who were separately convicted in Alaska of illegally registering and voting in your elections, including one of them by impersonating his nephew, and another resident of your state who was convicted of forging voter signatures on ballot petitions. This is just the tip of the iceberg. It does not include cases that, potential cases that were not investigated and not prosecuted. And I can tell you that we are following many cases right now that have not yet worked their way to their end, such as the former Democratic congressman in Pennsylvania who shortly before last year's election was indicted by the U.S. attorney there for bribing an election official to stuff the ballot box in multiple elections for multiple candidates. The election official has already pleaded guilty to accepting those bribes and, in fact, stuffing the ballot box. So what's the answer to all of this? There's all kinds of improvements that states can make. I submitted to the committee a fact sheet that the Heritage Foundation put out a week ago. It's called The Facts About Election Integrity and the Need for States to Fix Their Election Systems. It is a list of best practices, recommendations on the entire voting and election process, on everything from voter registration systems and how to maintain their accuracy, to our recommendations on how absentee ballots should be handled. This is a long list. I absolutely can't cover all of this in my testimony, so I'm just going to give you a couple of samples of the recommendations. First of all, statewide voter registration lists should be interoperable. In other words, your statewide voter registration list should, on a regular basis, be able to do comparisons with and check data in your other state databases, your DMV database, your state corrections database, your state welfare and public assistance database. The point of that is to find information that is relevant not just to the residence address of voters, but also to their citizenship status, their death, and other factors that may affect their eligibility. This is also an advantage to voters. You know, if you go change your address at DMV because you have moved and have to get a new driver's license, your system should be connected so that it will automatically change your residential address for voting. Something that also states and counties need to do, that a lot of counties are not doing, is checking new voter registrations against county tax records. Look, we all know the number one priority for county governments is collecting property taxes. That's how they fund their operations. But yet a lot of election officials are not taking advantage of that. The law in every state is you have to register where you live and reside. when those registration applications come in, election officials in each county should be checking them against county records to ensure that it really is a residential address, that it is not an industrial property, a commercial property, a vacant lot, a county park. That's an easy remedy, an easy fix, and yet that's not being done. At least quarterly, the state ought to be running comparisons against the NCOA system. That's the National Change of Address System run by the U.S. Postal Service. That's the system that we all use when, if we move, you can file with the Postal Service giving them your new address. They will forward your mail to you. States are not frequently enough checking the NCOA system to find individuals who have moved, particularly folks who have moved out of state and therefore should no longer be on the registration list. State election officials should also be given access to, and you should appropriate money so that they are able to check with commercial data houses, particularly credit agencies. Why? Because credit agencies often have much more up-to-date and current information on individuals than state databases. And that's a way, again, of checking the accuracy and maintaining the accuracy of your systems. On citizenship, there's a whole series of things that states ought to do and are not doing. I think I mentioned the fact that you had several individuals already in past years who were not citizens who were convicted. But the problem is we have found quite a bit bigger than that. But just a simple fix that the state ought to do is when individuals are called for jury duty, whether it's for state courts or federal courts, they have to fill out a questionnaire as to whether or not they are U.S. citizens. That questionnaire is filled out under oath. In most states, election officials supply their voter registration list to the state courts and also to the federal courts. And an easy change and a fix to state law is to require jury commissioners or court clerks to send that information back to election officials. If someone's excused from jury duty because they're not a U.S. citizen, election officials need to know about it. If someone is excused from jury duty because they've moved out of the state, that information needs to go back to election officials. In many states, that's not being done. Same thing with the federal courts. Most federal courts rely on state voter registration lists for their jury lists, and the state should condition providing that voter registration list to federal courts that want it on the federal courts agreeing to pass back to the state election officials, again, information on people called for jury duty who no longer live in the state or are not U.S. citizens, or if they are felons who have lost their right to vote, has not yet been restored, that information should be sent to. A basic requirement for security, and it's a common sense requirement. It's one that the overwhelming majority of American people support. Polling shows that, no matter what their political party, no matter what their ethnicity or race, is requiring an ID to vote. Such an ID should be applied to both in-person and absentee ballots. I will tell you that Alaska's voter ID law is extremely weak, since it allows, for example, utility bills and bank statements, which I can easily create on my laptop that I'm now speaking from as an ID. And what's interesting about this is that I checked, and the Alaska Permanent Dividend Fund, if you want to apply for it, the application process makes it very clear that a utility bill or bank statement is not acceptable for establishing residence in the state, and yet it's considered acceptable for voting. On absentee ballots, there's a whole series of things that should be done. As I said, I think you should have to apply a voter ID requirement to absentee ballots, but also you should require a tracking system. You know, UPS and Federal Express put barcodes on their packages so that you can instantly tell where it is and when it will arrive. And that's the very same thing that election officials need to do, both on the envelope in which they send absentee ballots to voters and they need a barcode on the envelope that is given to voters to use to send the absentee ballot back. That is very, very important so that voters can keep track of the absentee ballots they've requested, and for this other reason. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission files a report with Congress every 2 years on each federal election. Those reports are based on survey data they get from each state. I checked that data, and for Alaska, in the last 4 federal elections, not including the last year's election, but 2012, 2014, 2016, and 2018, there were almost 3,000 absentee ballots listed as being undeliverable. That means that election officials sent them to voters who had requested them, and the Postal Service sent them back saying they're not deliverable. Over 18,000 absentee ballots are listed by Alaska as status unknown. That means that a voter requested an absentee ballot, election officials sent it to the voters, and then never heard another word about it. So the state doesn't know whether the voters actually ever got the absentee ballots, whether the voter simply decided not to vote them, or whether the voter did fill out the ballot, put it in the mail, and then it was never delivered. A tracking system would help the state figure out what had happened to those ballots, and frankly, you need a system in place, for example, for the ballots that the Postal Service said were undeliverable to registered voters. Those need to be flagged so that election officials are under an obligation to investigate those and see why they were undeliverable and why there was a problem. I'll just do 2 other things because I say I'm running out of time. The state all states should ban vote trafficking. Okay, another word for that is vote harvesting, and let me explain why. Look, no one disputes that we need absentee ballots for individuals who are permanently disabled, are too sick to make it to polling places on election day, or otherwise out of town on election day and can't vote. Individuals should be able to mail those ballots back, personally deliver them themselves, or a member of their family or a designated caregiver should be able to deliver those ballots. But if a state allows any third-party stranger to pick up and deliver those ballots, what you are doing is you are putting a valuable commodity, a ballot, into the hands potentially of candidates, campaign staffers, party activists, political consultants, and people who have a stake in the outcome of the election. And we have seen from case studies of absentee ballot cases, and I've done a number of case studies of investigations and prosecutions of absentee ballot fraud cases, that absentee ballots, because they are the only kind of ballot that are voted outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll observers or poll watchers, it makes them much more vulnerable to being altered, changed, not delivered, and it also subjects voters potentially to coercion and pressure in their homes, and those are all factors that have occurred in absentee ballot fraud cases. So there's plenty of opportunity for voters with their families in the mail to get absentee ballots back. It's just not a good idea to allow third-party strangers to do that. Finally, I think one thing that we saw in the last election that I think all states should ban is election officials, both the state and local level, should not be allowed to receive private funding from private organizations. This creates a potential conflict of interest that election officials maybe then feel obligated to act at the directives of those organizations. Plus, it may create unequal opportunities to vote within a state. If certain jurisdictions are getting private funding over, above, and beyond the state funding and local funding that they're getting, they may create more opportunities to vote in those areas than other parts of the state, which provides, I think, a real problem under both federal voting rights laws and under constitutional equal protection principles. This is just a few of the recommendations we made. As I said, we supply many others in this best practices fact sheet that we have submitted, and then I'd be happy to answer questions now or after all the folks have given their opening statements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was a very measured, very fact-filled presentation, and it was exactly what we were hoping for folks from the lower 48 that have been researching this for some time, that could help us understand the broader issues that we face, including what happens in Alaska. And I appreciate that you had some Alaska-specific information. There are many of the things that I'm checking them off down the list going, got it, in there. Things already in the bill, like cross-referencing the databases. We don't do it, but we can. We've got, I think, 12 or 13 of them now. You mentioned, I was going to ask you about our PFD, our permanent fund, because it's automatic registration right now, which has created issues, and you already covered it. So I have one question for you that I'm going to open up to the panel here, and we'll do that, and you're welcome to stay with us for the rest, or after that, do what you need to do, sir. I know your time is precious. One of them is, you said requiring ID to vote is a generally, by polling and other data, accepted and desired state from most Americans in the voting system. I have also been told, though, and of course in the last few weeks I've been rather lambasted in the press and others for wanting to suppress the vote, etc., with any kind of bill like this to try to increase our election security and integrity. But you talked about the voter ID, and one of the things that a lot of folks have mentioned is that, well, that's voter suppression. That's any kind of racist, you name it, what it might happen to be. And you talked about in person, of course, which we acknowledge that up here, you don't have to show a ID currently. You just have to prove something, like you said, like a gas bill, you name it, and you can do that. We're aware of that. How would you, two things. Could you just illuminate a little bit more of that, because it's such a contentious political issue of the accusations flying of people that might request a voter ID? And then for absentee, how, again, would you suggest, or ideas that you may have for having an ID with absentee, because it's one of the things we're struggling with a multi-factor type authentication for people, especially for mail-in absentee balloting, because that's our chain of custody. We don't have one. So thank you.
The idea that voter ID suppresses votes is a narrative myth created by those who oppose it. And here's how we know that. First of all, there have been voter ID laws in place now for more than a decade. Indiana's law, as I said, was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2008. Georgia's voter ID law, requiring a government-issued voter ID, was first in effect in the 2008 election. The vast majority of lawsuits that were filed against states that put in those kind of ID requirements have failed. A few have been successful, but almost all of them have failed for the simple reason that, for example, the Georgia and Indiana cases, which I'm most familiar with, the plaintiffs were unable to produce a single witness who would be unable to get an ID. And the reason for that is that every single state that put in an ID requirement, first of all, Americans overwhelmingly in the upper 90th percentiles in most states, upwards of 96, 97, 98%, already have an ID. As you know, we don't have a national ID card in this country. The national ID card everybody uses are driver's licenses. And in every single state that has put in an ID law, they have put in a provision providing a free ID for anyone that doesn't have one. Second, we know it doesn't suppress votes because, as I said, these laws have been in place for more than a decade. We have 10 years, more than 10 years now, worth of turnout data from states with ID laws that can be compared to states without ID laws. That data shows, and I've published a number of papers on what happened to turnout in states such as Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, and elsewhere when their ID laws went in place. And not only did turnout not go down, it went up. And that means, in Georgia, for example, the turnout of black voters and Hispanic voters went up at a greater rate than the turnout of white voters. I would refer you to a study put out in 2019 by the National Bureau of Economic Research. You can easily Google this and find it. They examined voter turnout across the 50 states from 2008 through 2016. And here's their conclusion. Voter ID laws had, quote, no negative effect on registration or turnout overall or for any specific group defined by race, gender, age, or party affiliation. Now, how do you apply this to absentee balloting? I would refer you to the laws, for example, in Alabama and Kansas. Alabama and Kansas both have voter ID laws that apply to absentee balloting. In the Kansas law, the way you can satisfy that requirement, for example, is you can send in a photocopy of any of the acceptable IDs, and the IDs, there's a long list. It's everything from passports to military IDs to driver's licenses to the non-driver's license photo IDs that every DMV issues, or if you have a state-issued driver's license or non-photo ID, and remember, they provide it free to anyone who needs one, you can simply write in the serial number of that unique photo ID that you have on the absentee ballot request form or the absentee ballot form that you fill out when you send the ballot back, and that satisfies the requirement. Those laws have been in place now for years. They've had no problems with them. This idea that the vote will be suppressed because of them, it's just not true. And the reason is, and this is why Americans overwhelmingly support this, everyday Americans, blue-collar guys, middle class, we have to show an ID every day for many different reasons. Everything from buying a beer to cashing a check to exercising other constitutional rights, such as traveling. You want to get on an airplane, you need a photo ID. You want to exercise your Second Amendment right to buy a gun, you have to have a photo ID. If in almost every city and town, if you want to get a marriage license, and the Supreme Court, as you know, has said that the ability to get married, that is a civil constitutional right, you have to have a government-issued photo ID. So that is just not a problem, and all the claims that somehow keep people from voting, all you have to do is look at the experience of the states that put in IDs, Georgia, Indiana, Tennessee, and other states. It hasn't suppressed votes. In fact, their turnout has gone up. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. And I'm going to defer. Senator Reinbold has a question.
First of all, this is fascinating. I've taken a whole page of notes. This is so good. It's like you gave us definitely a blueprint for helping improve voter integrity, because I would say that in Alaska, there's a lot of dissatisfaction going on right now. And I'm not going to go into the presidential election, but I will, first of all, want to set the record straight. He says that he was accused in the, being accused in the media of voter suppression. Every time he says that, I'm going to say he's being falsely accused. And I believe it's bearing false witness, which is completely wrong. The media has freedom of speech, but they have to bear the responsibility of their actions. I think they're misusing and abusing it. So I will come to your defense in regards to this. Every time you say you're being accused, I'm going to say falsely accused. Anyway, that was super important for me to get on the record. But my question is, this bill is coming to judiciary next, and I cannot wait for this bill to come to our committee. I'm trying to get Judge Crosby before our Judiciary Committee. We are requesting her presence there, which I don't know about, the branches of government, but right now it feels like the executive branch lives in the legislative branch, the executive branch, which is probably my biggest pet peeve right now. And so I have no problem bringing the judiciary before us. If we're going to all cross lanes, then let's bring the judiciary branch before the legislature as well. Because where's the checks and balances on the judicial branch? That's what my question to you is, because Judge Crosby struck down a really important provision that we put into law, and I feel like it potentially swung the election. And so with that, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on that, but we will definitely be addressing that in judiciary.
Just to be clear on that, and you may be aware of this, but the Judge Crosby she's referring to struck down our witness signature requirement. That's the legislator's purview, so that's specifically, okay. Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with that. And what I would tell you about that is that a lawsuit was filed, you may know this, in South Carolina called Andino versus Middleton, trying to do exactly the same thing and trying to use the COVID pandemic as an excuse not to allow the state to enforce its witness signature requirement. You may know that case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which overturned a stay that I think had been unwisely and unlawfully granted by a lower court. And South Carolina was allowed to enforce its witness signature requirement. And there's two things about that. And this was in a statement made, I think, by Justice Kavanaugh when they overturned the lower court injunction and allowed the witness signature requirement to be applied. This is very important. The South Carolina had as a witness in that case their director of infectious diseases at the Medical University of South Carolina. And she came in and she said that the witness signature requirement did not pose a significant risk because, quote, it takes little time and can be done with face masks, social distancing, and proper hygiene. You know, it takes about a minute to witness someone signing an affidavit, a voter signing an absentee ballot affidavit, which you can safely do, as she said, wearing a mask and 6 feet away. I'd be willing to bet you that the plaintiffs in those cases, if you were to ask them, well, how often have you been going to the grocery store and the pharmacy and all these other places where they're highly more likely to potentially catch COVID-19, they probably would have said they're doing that all the time, and they're spending a lot more time out in those kind of establishments than it takes for a minute. Second, though, on the main issue that you talked about, look, the Supreme Court, it wasn't just the South Carolina case, but in numerous cases, they overturned stays and injunctions issued by lower court judges in the federal courts, because what they said was that judges were interfering with the decisions made by state legislatures, and that state officials were in a much better position to judge what was necessary to deal with COVID-19, particularly in the election area, than judges. And these judges were also making changes in the rules close to an election, which the Supreme Court says they are not supposed to do because that causes not only confusion and chaos for voters, but confusion and chaos for election officials. So what should have happened in that case is the judges in Alaska, I believe, should have followed what the Supreme Court said in the South Carolina case. They should have allowed the witness signature requirement to be enforced. Alabama had a similar lawsuit, and the very same thing happened there. Again, the higher courts said, of course, the state can continue to apply its witness signature requirement, and there were no problems because of that during the election. There was no spike in COVID-19 infections because they were able to enforce their signature requirement.
Thank you, sir. That's your depth of knowledge on this is very impressive for this case studies you're bringing. Other committee members, do you have any questions this time? I have one quick one here, just for timing's sake. Do you know, because you had mentioned this before, but if mandatory voter ID back to the case law for the country would violate any portion of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and are you aware of anything flowing through right now relative to that?
As I said, the majority, every state that passed a voter ID law, with the exception of the first one in Indiana, claims have been made both that the laws were unconstitutional and that they violated the Voting Rights Act. Only in one or two of the cases was there found to be a violation of the Voting Rights Act. In almost every other case, it was not found to be a violation of the Voting Rights Act for the simple reason that, first of all, the voter ID requirement applies equally to all voters. Second, whenever evidence had to be produced by the plaintiffs in those cases, they were not able to show that there's really any significant or substantial difference in whether you're black or Hispanic or white in holding an ID, or most importantly, your ability to get an ID, particularly in the Wisconsin case over their ID law, the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals said it would be one thing if you could show that state officials were discriminating against individuals in their ability to obtain an ID. But there was no such evidence, for example, in the Wisconsin case, and there's been no evidence produced in any other state that state officials are somehow refusing to give IDs to some people instead of others. In Alabama, in order to make sure that the very small number of people who don't have an ID would be able to have one, they even equipped a mobile van that would go to the homes of individuals who are unable on their own to get to the many places where you could get an ID. The claims of discrimination were made in the Alabama case. The courts threw them out and said the ID laws were not discriminatory.
Well, sir, I have one yes or no question because of time here, because we've got another gentleman, I think, the same level of experience that you're bringing from down south. We have to get to. Just a real quick, with the concerns and information you have, has anybody from your organization ever contacted the Division of Elections in Alaska and given them this information? Were they made aware of these types of things that you're aware, that you know of?
No, I'm not aware that has happened. Although I will tell you, we've been trying to distribute as widely as possible to election officials all over the country the fact sheet that I was telling you about, the best practices recommendation that I submitted.
Well, sir, some of our folks here have asked for facts, and you have certainly provided an amazing amount of facts, and I have no doubt we're going to be back in touch with you. Are there any other questions from the committee at this time? So, as you said, sir, you're welcome. If you can stay for questions that may pop up later, that's awesome. If you need to move, I certainly understand. We have another guest from down south I really need to get to. I have two quick questions. Is the committee, based on time, just to make sure we get to the 4 line testimonies, if anybody could stay to give me a quorum, that would be awesome, but we can talk about it at 5. And if I could ask both Mr. Rampton and Mr. Pruitt if they wouldn't mind waiting until the last 3 and 4, just so we can get to our guest from down south, because he's in a whole 4-hour ahead time zone, if that's okay. So I beg your forgiveness on that, but we're going to move on. So thank you. And so we're going to have the next one come up, and if you could just go camera off and mute for the bandwidth, and we're going to bring up, and let me just get back to my script, because I'm going off on dozer style here. I'm going a little off here. Apologies. Getting on down here. Yeah, I got to get to the right one. Okay, so the next testifier on our agenda is Christian Adams with the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Mr. Anderson is appearing, Mr. Adams is appearing live via video conference as well. And if you could make sure that you're off of mute, please, sir. And when you're ready to introduce yourself first and the last name, who you represent, the floor is yours for the same act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for having me testify. My name is Christian Adams. I'm the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, or I call it PILF. We're a 501c3 that promotes election integrity. Formerly, I was an attorney in the United States Department of Justice voting section from 2005 to 2010, and I've done litigation all around the country enforcing the Voting Rights Act, National Voter Registration Act, Help America Vote Act, and other constitutional provisions related to voting. Excuse me. I have been studying Alaska for a very long time and have indeed communicated many of the findings I'm going to share with you today to your Division of Elections or Department of Elections over the years. One of the most striking things that I've noticed about Alaska, and this goes back to my time at the Justice Department, is Alaska has been consistently problematic with voter registration rates consistently above 100% of individuals who are eligible to vote. Now, how do we know this? Well, first of all, the Election Assistance Commission, which Mr. von Spakovsky indicated as a federal agency that collects election data, has been noting this in their semi-annual reports every 2 years, that Alaska is always coming in with implausible rates of registration. Now, there's nothing bad. I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with having a lot of people register to vote. But what I am saying in my experience when you have year after year after year after year more people registered to vote than you have people eligible, and not just by a slim amount, by a pretty significant margin, it indicates something's wrong. It's like taking a temperature of 105. And consistently, Alaska has been the worst state in the country for having implausible rates of registration where more people are registered to vote than there are people alive. The normal rate of registration in the country is anywhere between 70 and 80% of age-eligible citizen population. So in other words, you figure out how many people live in a place, and then you look at the number of people who are registered to vote. That number, in theory, should never be 105%, 110%, 120%. In most places, it's 70, 75, 80. But for some reason, and we could talk about why, in Alaska, federal officials have noted that this number is consistently running in the implausible range. Now, we have brought this to the attention of Alaska officials over the years, and I'm sorry to say I haven't seen a significant fix. So we don't know exactly why it happens, but we have some ideas why it's happening, and I'll share one of them with you. For a period of time, and it may be continuing today, Alaska has been allowing people to register in multiple jurisdictions. In other words, if somebody goes to vote in one jurisdiction and they're already registered in another jurisdiction, they are tending to get on the rolls in both places. Now, that situation may have been mitigated in the last 3 or 4 years, but the point is that it was happening at some time. The Help America Vote Act, which you may remember was passed in 2002 after the 2000 presidential election, did something very significant. It required every state, including Alaska, to set up a statewide database, a centralized list of voters. And the reason that they wanted this created was to fix the exact problem I just described, namely to prevent people from registering multiple times. Now, one of the reasons that this might be a problem in Alaska is that state officials are not utilizing the most effective review of this centralized statewide database. For example, I've brought litigation, as I've told you, in many places around the country. I have yet to find a single election office that does something very simple, and that's sort their statewide database by address. In other words, put it in an Excel spreadsheet and sort by address. And when you do that, you find some amazing things, because we have done this at the Public Interest Legal Foundation. You regularly find people who are registered multiple times because of tiny deviations in their name, such as a middle initial of J, and in another entry it's John. And state officials aren't normally going to catch that. And so that might be one of the causes why Alaska has consistently had implausible rates of registration. Last year, we issued a report, which you can get online, called Critical Condition. And what the Public Interest Legal Foundation did is something pretty unprecedented. We bought all of the voter rolls from most of the states in the country, over 41 of them. And we centralized all of these so we could see, for example, who was registered in Alaska and simultaneously registered in Washington state or any other state. We could look at who had died by taking Alaska's data and bouncing it off a variety of databases to identify dead registrants, as well as dead registrants who cast ballots. And I can give you that exact number for Alaska. In 2018, there were 61 Alaskans who cast ballots after death. In 2016, there were 62. Now, those might not sound like big numbers, but each one of those is a problem that election officials should be aware of. Other problems include duplicate registrations of people who are registered more than once, the sort that I told you. and this is not a myth either. For example, in Pittsburgh, and I know that's not Alaska, but when we did this study, we found one individual named Rashad Slade who was registered not twice, not 3 times, not even 5 times, who was registered simultaneously 7 active registrations in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, all through third-party registration groups who were registering this individual almost every other day right before the 2016 election, and all of those 7 registrations got onto the voter rolls. Now, in Alaska, we've looked at the numbers there, and these are same address duplicates. Same address duplicates showing second voter credits in the 2016 midterms. In Alaska, it's ranked 13th in the country for this, with a number of 209 duplicate votes, meaning somebody who's registered more than once cast 2 different ballots. Now, we have a high degree of confidence in the conclusion. It is true that there are sometimes false positives in these sorts of studies, but we bounced all of this data off commercial databases, other credit reporting bureaus, to identify, to make sure that these were the same exact person voting twice and not junior-senior differences. In 2016 was not a midterm, 2018 was. In the midterms in 2018 in Alaska ranked 13th again, strangely, in same address duplicate votes by the same person for duplicate registrations but casting 2 ballots, and in Alaska that number was 190 in 2018. Moving to intrastate duplicates. Alaska, these are same address duplicates inside the same state with double voting credits. In Alaska, it is 190 in 2018, and in 2016 the number was 209. That's Alaskans who live inside the state, not cross state lines like the first set. Okay. Lastly, let me tell you about another problem that's easily fixed on the voter rolls in Alaska. When you register to vote in Alaska, the law says your address, you must provide the Alaska residence address where you claim residency. And the instructions say, do not use a post office box, a PSC, a HC, or an RR, a rural route. Do not use a UPS box store. In other words, you are not supposed to be registering to vote where you don't live. You're supposed to register at a residential address. In Alaska, we took the voter rolls in Alaska, and we got databases of non-residential addresses. In other words, commercial addresses, business addresses. And we found in Alaska 565 registrations at non-commercial addresses. Now, you might say, well, that's not that big, but I would remind you in July of 2020, Congressman Steve Watkins from Kansas was indicted and charged with 3 felony counts of voter fraud for claiming a UPS store as an address as his residence. So this is serious stuff. It's not, even if you only have 565 instances of registrations at non-residential addresses, that's not as good as 0. So I could talk at great length about all of the many things that Mr. von Spakovsky talked about if you have any lingering questions, although he covered most of the issues that I think are important. I would leave you with one thing, probably the most important thing he said. Never allow private entities to fund your elections. Do not allow outside third parties to put in structural bias into the system. Elections are supposed to be impartial, clean, and something that everybody can trust. And the worst way to destroy trust in the elections is to fund them with billionaires' money to run the elections. And that's what happened in large sections of the country in the 2020 election. Do not ever allow that to happen in Alaska. With that, I'm open to your questions, and I appreciate very much your time and your invitation to testify. Thank you.
Again, sir, great testimony, fact-filled. That's what we were looking for, people that have the experience level of yours and the previous presenter that can bring clarity, but information that unfortunately we don't necessarily have on the bench here. And with the different, it's, as Senator Reinbold said, false accusations at times, but accusations of, why we're doing this. At times it's a struggle to be able to present the information because we don't have it all at our fingertips, and you're doing that, and that's what we asked for, so thank you very much for that time. I know there's some questions. I got a couple, and I'm going to go bounce around the table. Two quick ones. First of all, it's more of a comment. I think my staff sent a note, said we need to buy that data that you had, because clearly that's got a lot of great information on it, so we're going to take a look at that. And who has attempted contact at the Division of Elections?
Well, my staff has, and I will tell you, Senator, that the Division of Elections, I believe, has all of this information. One of the things we endeavor to do is when we find these problems is to alert the Division of Elections about the problems they have on their voter rolls. And we have been, over the years, sending the Division of Elections our data as we find it. And so it should not be a mystery to them that this is a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead. I know Senator Reinbold had a couple questions.
First of all, thank you very much. Again, I took lots of good notes. It's so nice to have someone that puts so much energy into solutions and not bring us a problem. It's actually bringing us, both of y'all bringing solutions, which I just love. So thank you, first of all, for that. Second, I want to get on the record. You said 565 non-commercial. I think you meant non-residential, correct?
Oh, my goodness. My wife will laugh at me. I have a name for when I flip things like that. Yes, you have caught an exact oversight. My apologies. I meant non-residential addresses where these individuals are registered to vote.
Okay, excellent. And through the chair?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have two questions now. One, you said rank 13 of what? You kept saying Alaska ranks 13, but I couldn't put the parameters in there.
Great question, Senator. 13th worst in the country. For example, votes cast from non-residential addresses. California is the worst at 7,244. Alaska is 20th on that at 565. When I said 13th, I was referring to this is. Let me make sure I have it right. Same address duplicate showing second vote credits in 2016 and 18. In other words, someone who is registered to vote more than once in Alaska at the same exact address casting more than one ballot, whether it's absentee ballot or in person.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, one more question.
Go ahead, Senator Reinbold.
Okay, the last question I have is you referred to dead voters, I believe, in 2016 and 2018. I'm not sure if that's, I believe it was District 15. I believe the candidate that has been accused of that is Gabrielle Ledoux. Do you know if those are related to that, or do you want to weigh in regards to that? And one other thing I want to weigh in on is the independent expenditure. I believe she also had an independent expenditure. We have a lot of independent expenditures up here. Even our current governor was elected with help from an independent expenditure, and even legislators can have independent expenditures, which I believe I know that this individual that has been accused of having dead voters vote in her district had an independent expenditure. And I think that was beautiful when you said never allow private entity in elections. They should be impartial, clean, and trusted. And I'm sorry, that's not the case in Alaska. So I think it's a little too late. What can we do to fix it?
Well, first of all, let me address the individual whose name you mentioned. I've never heard that name before in my life. So I'm not inferring that the numbers I gave were related to a particular person's race, because I just don't know that. Secondly, I could tell you the distribution of the dead votes in Alaska with more time. I don't know what district they were in or where they were concentrated. I just don't know. I just know that we know the names. And by the way, your State Board of Elections has, or your Department of Elections has this information. So we've alerted them to this already. Your last question, I think, related to independent expenditures. Look, there were billionaires who funded elections in 2020. This is not a mystery. It's not controversial that it happened. Everybody knows it happened. $450 million. Private money flowed into running elections. For example, the city of Philadelphia had a budget of $9.8 million. This private money doubled it, gave them $10 million. So now some people might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, if you were against the person who's funding it, right? What does that make you feel like? If somebody who's funding private elections stands in opposition to your values, your political views, your ideology, that's corrosive to trust in the process. And that's exactly what happened in 2020, is $450 million flowed into funding elections through private C3 foundations. We don't know where they all got the money necessarily, and they funded government election offices. That's never happened before in this country. It erodes trust in the system. Don't let it happen. Ban it.
All right, thank you very much. And that's it's interesting for us here because we actually started this effort about 3 years ago in our office. We filed the first bill over 2 years ago. Didn't get a hearing on it, and I thought that was kind of interesting because it was the left half of the political spectrum that was yelling and saying illegitimate election, fraud, not our president. And 4 years later, we have the other side of the country doing the same thing, and we were already filing this bill, and now they got the other half mad at us. So I think what you just said is germane, which is the fact that it seems like most people's faith in one manner or another has been shaken in our election system, and our goal is to find a way to try to restore some of that faith in it, the security, the integrity, the chain of custody, so that our citizens go, okay, the election's over. My guy may or not have won or not, but I have faith in the system, and we stop with that divisiveness. So thank you very much. That was fantastic. Other questions from the committee? Sir, thank you again for that. We may be in touch because this is great information in helping us guide our path forward. As with the previous speaker, you're welcome to stay on for other questions if they're generated. If you need to go, I certainly understand it. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Anytime you need anything, I'm happy to help.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to go back just in the order that they had originally been set to come on here, so that way neither one of them get mad at me since I know both of them. We're going to go on to our testifier. The next one, he was first on the list, was Dr. Jason Rampton, the District 14 Chairman from Eagle River. I think it's Vice Chairman, if I get that right. Dr. Rampton is appearing live via video conference. Dr. Rampton, if you please introduce yourself first, last name, who you represent, and then the floor is yours, sir. Please make sure you're unmuted, just in case.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear. Please state your name.
Okay.
And who you
My name is
represent.
Jason Rampton. I appreciate this opportunity to sit before you today and to make a few comments. I'm the vice chair of our district here in Eagle River. Back in November and December, several allegations were brought forward, or several claims of voter irregularities within our district here, and it was discussed in our meeting, and the request was made that I take those allegations or those irregularities forward to the Division of Elections and to the Lieutenant Governor, which I did. And I'd like to detail some of those. I'm a dentist here in Eagle River. I served in the military for 20 years. I retired as an officer from the Air Force. Senator Showers and I are both Air Force buddies. My team used to play his team, and we used to beat him all the time. So we have some things in common. I've served for 20 years after the Air Force in private practice here in Eagle River. I've just recently retired. I'm planning to do some missionary dentistry in Africa here in the near future, but COVID is kind of wreaking havoc with those plans right now. In our district meetings, several claims came up, and I'd like to just detail those to you. I know, Senator Reinbold, you're here in this area. You're from Eagle River. You may know some of these people. There's a lady named Paulette Ditzler. She's the home ec teacher at Chugiak High School. She had a claim that was brought to us. She went in to vote on election day, this last election of 2020. And when she went in and showed up at her polling location, she was told that her vote had already been cast. And she says, well, that couldn't be. I haven't voted. And they assured her that it had been. And she argued with them for a while, and they checked it, and sure enough, her vote had been cast. And they allowed her to put forth I don't know if the proper word for it is contested ballot or provisional ballot to allow her vote to go forward. And that vote was eventually counted, but still the question lingers, how did that vote get counted? So we submitted that, and they came back with I don't think they ever resolved exactly where it came from. They came back with a couple of theories, possibilities. They said, well, maybe a family member had, got mixed up or something, or they never did resolve it. They tried to explain it away. They said that they recognized that it had happened, though. It truly did happen right here in Eagle River. Somebody else voted for Paulette Ditzler. That was the first allegation that we had. There were 12 other ballot claims that were brought forward. A gentleman here in Eagle River by the name of Jeff Wright had 3 ballots that were brought to his home. These are mail-in ballots for people that had previously lived in his home. And we knew all of those people, and he knew all of those people, and their legitimate names. For somehow the Division of Elections had allowed those ballots to be sent out, and they were collected by Jeff. If he would, just discarded them because he didn't know what else to do with them, but they were obtained. Second person, many of you know Jamie Allard out here in Eagle River. She had 2 ballots that were delivered to her house for the Johnston family. It's a previous military family. He was a military pediatrician that lived here in Eagle River. They had left and PCS'd on to Italy, to an air base in Italy, but their ballots were delivered to the home of Jamie Allard. And I believe she just discarded her ballots also. Joe Wright, who is the chairman of our District 14, had a ballot delivered for his son, who had moved out of the house and moved on. So that makes 6 ballots. Sharon Jackson, Representative Sharon Jackson, who many of you know. Well, all of you know her. She has lived here in Eagle River for about 16 or 17 years. About 12 years ago, she bought the house or moved into the house that they currently live in, her and her husband, Tim. A few years ago, 5 years ago, in 2016, she received, there was a ballot received for a lady who had lived there 12 years ago, and they saw the ballot, but they knew who this lady was, and she had died 7 years ago. So there was a ballot floating around for a person that had been dead for 7 years, and it had still been sent out and been received at Representative Jackson's. That's one of the reasons that she was initially ran for office. As you know, she ran for lieutenant governor here in the state of Alaska, was not elected, but that event was what triggered her desire to go out and run, because she was so upset that she received a ballot for somebody that had been dead for 7 years, and she received that in her own mailbox at her own home. Another person, Kristen Bush, received in 2019, she received 4 ballots. Now, I've got the names of all of these people, all of the people that the ballots' names were in, all of the voters. I'm not going to give them all out right now, but I do have them. And I've got the phone numbers for all these people that this happened to, so they can be contacted, this can be verified. And I've actually contacted them all within the last 2 or 3 days to make sure that I got the information correctly. But Kristen Bush received 4 ballots in 2019 for elections that were held here. In 2020, she received 1 more ballot. So that's a total of 5 for Kristen Bush. So that's a list of 12 ballots other than Paulette Ditzler that have been received here in Eagle River. Now, we're a pretty small group here. We don't represent a very big section of the population of Alaska, and our little District 14, the people that meet together, are even a smaller subsection of that. But if we're receiving 13 ballots here in our little group, in our little area here, locally in our neighborhood, certainly there are many, many, many more out in the community and in the state at large. And so I wanted you to be aware that this is something that is very real. I've got all the names of the people that received the ballots. I've talked to every one of them numerous times. I've got the names of the people whose names were on the ballots. I've got that information. We've turned that into the Division of Elections, and I think they're trying to clean up the records to try to prevent those names from popping up again. But that still doesn't solve the problem for the rest of the state. These ballots are out there, and it's happening, and we know it's happening. Another voter in our district, Debbie Ostendorf. She brought to my attention, this happened long before this election. This happened actually several years ago, but she brought it to me. I've served in the Republican Party leadership in our district for a number of years. She brought this to me, and she said she had a letter, that's a U.S. Post Office letter, a snail mail letter, that she received from the lower 48. It was inquiring about the voting, acquiring voting information to help a gentleman down in the lower 48 to get his voting requirements completed for that state. And I'm not sure where it was from. She thought it was from from Colorado. But she brought the letter in and she showed it to me, and I saw it with my own eyes. And she said when they contacted her with requesting this information, she said that immediately was suspicious to her because she knew that person. She had purchased the house that she was living in through an estate sale. This gentleman had been the owner of the house before he passed on, and they bought the house that they lived in from the estate of that gentleman. She actually had a death certificate in her possession because she had the papers from the purchase of the house. Now, I've sent a copy of that death certificate to you. Do you have it before you right now? Is it in your hands?
It should be in the packet. I can go through it while you're continuing.
Okay, that death certificate it's James Allen Spangler was the name of the gentleman. I called the Division of Elections immediately after we were notified of this. Now, this was quite a few years back. I called them to notify them of this irregularity, that somebody was out there trying to scam us. Somebody from the lower 48 was trying to mine our information and to acquire information to obtain a ballot, apparently to be used in the lower 48 somewhere. The Division of Elections immediately they just sort of stood back and they said, well, it's not our problem. It didn't happen with our people. This was an event that was orchestrated by people from out of state. I said, you should know about it, and you should be able to know how to help us to uncover this or to expose this. But they were totally unhelpful. They did check the local Alaskan records to see if Mr. Spangler, the dead person, if he had voted in Alaska, and he had not. But I asked, is there any way to check and see if he's voted in any other state? And they said, well, we don't know. That's hard to do, and blah, blah, blah. I wasn't, so I took it on to another Division of Elections office up in Wasilla, went and talked to them, kind of got the same response from them. And then I went back later and talked to the office down here. Same response. They just they were not helpful in trying to uncover or to shed light on that. They just said, well, that's just too hard to find. So look, that death certificate in your hands, we suspect that there was some fraud that took place there. There's no conviction, no proof. We don't have any leads to follow. We don't know where to take it. But somebody was trying to put together a ballot in his behalf. We don't know where or how it was used. Okay. Next thing, we were looking at some of the irregularities that took place in the lower 48. I was looking on the internet and I saw some reference that came out of some hearings down in Georgia, in the Senate hearings down there during this last presidential election. They referenced in a hearing, and I heard them do this, they referenced Alaska and the overvoting that occurs here. Now, that was referenced to one of these gentlemen earlier today that spoke with us, and they may have, if they're still listening, I'd like to hear what they say about this. But there were if you look at this chart in here, that's the one that says over registration. It's a big chart, and it's kind of, I apologize for the low quality of this, but it was hard. I had to literally cut and paste this off the internet, and it wasn't very good, but the information on there is very good. If you look along there, Alaska's at the very top. If you look over to the far right side of that, it shows that Alaska has 43,881 out-of-state registered voters. That number is calculated by taking the number of what they're calling residents, or residents of Alaska, and subtracting that from the total registered voters. Now, when I saw that figure of 43,881 over-registered voters, I thought, that isn't calculated correctly. You have to look at this. Somebody has put this together in a way to under-calculate that, because if you look at in this column where it says residents over 18 years of age, that number, 553,438 residents over 18 years of age, that's the total number of residents. That number added to the out-of-state should total the total registered voters in the state of Alaska. This number is 553,000 is, and if you look at the next sheet that I gave you, the one that says voting facts in Alaska, I hope I'm making sense to you here. If you look at that, those numbers, when added together, the residents over 18 and the Alaska registered out-of-state voters, those numbers should total 597,000, which is on the far left side of the sheet there. That's the total number of registered voters. That's an easy number to come by. But the Division of Elections, or whoever reported this, has reported the number of 553,438. That's the total number of residents over 18. That has nothing to do with people that are registered. But they've put it in there, and they've made it appear as though it is. If you were to take the number, say 90%, assume that 90% of the people in Alaska that are eligible to vote, if 90% of those people were to vote, and you calculated this out, that would give you a number of 99,225 out-of-state voters. This is huge. This is huge, and this is misrepresented in this chart here. The numbers are not. The books are cooked right here, and this is not accurate. What we're seeing on this chart, they're trying to make it look like it's only 43,881 out-of-state registered voters, but the number is actually much higher than that. Now, I've called them and I've asked them. I said, what is the actual number of registered voters inside the boundaries of Alaska? And they have refused to give me that number. They haven't answered my questions. They haven't called back. They've just kind of ignored it and hoped I'd go away. But if we could put that number if we could find that number, you could calculate the actual number of out-of-state voters. And it is not 43,000. That number is way low. It's kind of a shell game that's being played with us here. The gentleman that spoke earlier talked about the high number. It shows us being 108%, 8% over-registered, above 100%. I propose to you that the number is actually way above 8%. It's probably closer to 120 or 130%. But the Division of Elections has not given us those numbers, and that's clear when you do the math and you look at these numbers right here. So this information is accurate. The numbers don't lie. And I'm not an accountant. I'm just a dentist. But I was pretty good in math, and those numbers are not correct. And if we're at 80% registered voters in the state, which is about where most states are, then this would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 out-of-state Alaskan voters. This is due, I think, in great part to the permanent fund, people registering for the permanent fund and applying for their permanent fund and being registered at the same time. And then they leave the state of Alaska and they try to keep their qualifications up for the permanent fund, but they're out in the lower 48. And down in Georgia, the Senate hearings down there were claiming that a lot of the people that were voting down there in Georgia were actually Alaskans. That's why this came up in the hearings, in the Senate hearings in Georgia. So we need to take a deep dive into this and look at it. If anybody wants to call me and discuss it, I think it's pretty, if you sit down and look at these numbers, it's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. But the numbers of registered voters living outside of Alaska registered voters living outside of Alaska, I propose to you is closer to 150,000 and not just 43,000.
Okay, Doc, that was a really good testimony, what we were looking for. Thank you very much. I think we may have...
Okay, well, I appreciate your time, and the testimony that's been given before me was outstanding. Mine was just kind of mediocre, but the numbers, I believe, are true. And if you guys will look at these things, look at them, and do the math on it, you will see that number, 43,000, is not correct. That is way low.
If you think these numbers are impressive, Doc, wait until you see what we got for you next week. We're going to knock your socks off. So just hold on to your horses on that. Okay. There's more to come. And we're already on to that rabbit hole. So thank you very much. I know Senator Reinbold had a quick question because I want to reserve as much time as I can for Rep. Pruitt. He's coming up with some good information right after this.
Mine's going to be a quick comment. First, Dr. Rampton, first of all, I just want to add to the fact that I can tell you, I believe both in the state and the city elections, my children have moved out of state 5 years or so ago, and we're still getting, we've been gotten ballots from them. So, I mean, we can add, so I'm sure your numbers are way, way underestimated.
Okay.
But I want, go ahead.
No, that just proves the point. That we haven't dug deeply into this. We haven't been out looking for information. This is just information that people, they did not know where to report it, and so they came to us as the District 14 Republican Party says, hey, this is strange. I'm getting these ballots. What do I do? It isn't. We haven't dug hard to find these numbers. These have just been thrown at us.
Okay, and
there's many more of them out there.
Right. Yes, and I just wanted to validate, but I also wanted to say you are an honorable man. You are humble. You're hardworking. You're smart, kind, and inquisitive. And I just wanted to say thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Reinbold.
Doc, and just in the interest of time, because we really have a good testimony coming up after here as well, just yes or no is fine, or answering it. But I know that when we brought this we've had a lot of ballot information like this where people are saying they're getting multiple ballots that they did not apply for. And Division of Elections has consistently told us, well, that's not true. We've investigated this. They're just applications. I want to be crystal clear because of the people we've asked. We were very specific. Applications or ballots? Every one of them said ballots, and DOE is trying to say otherwise. So just to be clear, on the record, you're saying these weren't applications, they're ballots, right?
I called these individuals this morning to verify that very question with them. I says, were these actual ballots that you had in your hands? And they all said yes. Now, they weren't all from 2020. Some of them were from 2019. One was from 2016. But every one of them had the same story, that these were ballots that we had in our hands. Now, Sharon actually, she said that she thinks she's got a photograph because she turned it in somewhere, and she said she's trying to find a photograph of the ballot. The problem is most of the people, when they get something like that, they'll just discard it because they don't want it to get out into the public. They'll just throw it away, or they'll shred it, and so they get rid of it that way. But what they have all said, and it's been across the board. Every one of them says these were ballots.
Awesome. Thanks, Doc. And I appreciate your time today. And I don't think there's any other questions from the committee. Nobody raised their hand. We're going to move on to Representative Pruitt, who has been very patient. I say representative or former representative. I'm not actually sure what the right protocol, but Lance Pruitt is with us today. Has some really powerful testimony and things that have happened. And I'm going to ask if the committee's okay. At least 3 would stay. so we can continue, because I think you want to hear what he has to say. It's very germane. We set it up for a reason this way, because I wanted to hear some of the context and then talk about things that just happened and court cases and other things that Lance can talk to us about. So if everybody's okay, or if somebody needs to go, if we could just extend a little after 5, if our staff would be willing to help, that would be fantastic. If you could do that, thank you. All right. I'm just going to call you Representative Pruitt for now. So, Representative Pruitt, when you're ready, you know how it works. If you go ahead and put yourself on the record, who you represent today, and then the floor is yours. And I'll try to give you as much time as we can, because I'd like to allow you the time and not short you here because of the presenter. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Schauer and the rest of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you for the invite to speak today. My name is Lance Pruitt. I was most recently a course candidate in District 27, and through the process of that electoral process, there was, of course, a very close race when it came down to it. And through that, in the court process that proceeded, we learned a lot. And there are 3 things that I'm going to touch on. And I'm going to try to make sure to clarify each one of those. The first is voting locations, specifically referring to polling locations. The second piece is referring to the people that have moved in or out of the district. And then the third piece is what we've learned related to absentees, the number of absentees that were counted in comparison to the past. The first thing, the location piece, this is a very important one, because it was the key thing that we took all the way to the Supreme Court, and that we were able to argue in the Supreme Court. There were other things that we intended to argue, but were not given the opportunity. This is the one that made it all the way there. To give you a picture of, in our district, in my district, there were 2 precincts that were moved. One was moved about a month prior to the primary, and it was our Basher precinct. They mailed out to the people in that precinct, they mailed a card letting them know that their precinct had been moved. The second one that changed was actually initially during the primary kind of a surprise. On August 17th, the chair of the district showed up at the polling location to make sure everything was in order. And in the process, he had to sign in, and he had a temperature check. He called the Division of Elections and said, this is probably going to be a challenge, because it was the corporate policy of Wayland Baptist University, this location, that everyone was to have to check and sign in. And he said, it's probably not going to work for everyone. So they immediately just changed the next day. They changed it to the Muldoon Town Center, which is outside of the district. Many people used to know it as the Muldoon Mall, where the East 40 Bowl was, etc. Well, when it came time for the general, I wanted to make sure that I could communicate to our constituents and this precinct where they needed to go vote, because it had happened so suddenly the time before. On October 21st, I called the Division of Elections and asked them where the location would be. Together, myself and the Division of Elections individual, we looked up on me on my computer, she on hers. We looked up together on the phone and found that the location that they had on the website was the Muldoon Town Center. I asked, how can we be sure? How can we confirm that this will not move? She said the contracts are already signed and it's not moving. Then what we found out through the court process was on October 22nd, the next day, they called the owner of the Muldoon Town Center and said, hey, we're just checking in. Well, the Muldoon Town Center for many years has been a precinct location for District 15. When they took this precinct, the Wayland Baptist precinct, and moved it, they now created 2 precincts from 2 separate districts at the same location. When they called and said, we'd like to just make sure everything's good, they said, no, you can't have it here, because you didn't even tell us that you moved it last time, and you took 2 weeks to come pick up your stuff afterwards. And because of your carelessness, we had someone trip. And so we, not only can you not have this precinct here, we're not even sure if we want to allow precincts to be here in the future. So on October 22nd, they started searching for another location. And they eventually fell on the Begich Middle School location. There are two things that I'd like to highlight. First, COVID was utilized as the reason for changing it to begin with. But COVID was not the reason for the second change. They had from August 18th to October 22nd, when they finally called, there was no contact with anyone at any point in time to find out whether or not that location could be used. Even worse is the next piece that I want to highlight. Our statutes currently state that if a location is changed, 5 things need to happen. Now, one is if you can, that's a mail out. They should mail out to all the constituents that they've changed their location. That is, if you have enough time, you can. The other 4 are musts, and they all should happen. They should change it on the website. They should send it to the local clerk. They should publish it in the paper, and they should publish it in the official election pamphlet. The only thing that they actually did was they changed it on the website within about a week or so of the election. And even then, they didn't change it on all the locations on the website, because even on election day, people were still going to the website and finding the wrong location, including one of the election workers that was trying to work with someone that was lost. So they did not make it the only thing they did to let people know was they put a sign at the old location saying it's somewhere else. That was a violation of the statute. They went through that whole time, August 18th through October 22nd. At no time did they try to make sure and notify people that they were even moving it from Wayland to the town center, even though they intended for it to be at the town center. So you think that this is just my district we're talking about. Let's extrapolate this out for the state. There were 67 precincts that were changed out of 442 in the state. Let's focus on Anchorage and Wasilla. There were 28 that were changed out of 170. So 19 out of the 119 in Anchorage. How many were in the official election pamphlet? 2. 1 in Wasilla and 1 in Houston. The Division of Elections failed to communicate even in the simplest form. But what are the consequences? There are none. Everyone that was associated with it still holds their jobs, still working at the Division of Elections, but yet they did not follow the statute. That's section number 1. The second thing that I need to highlight. This is something that is not in statute, or there is statute, but I believe you need to look at it very carefully. And that relates to the state constitutional requirement that an individual needs to live in a district for 30 days prior to the election to be able to vote for a state senator or a state house rep in a particular district. They must live there for 30 days. As we were going through our process and searching, we knew, because we were getting some feedback from people, that they said there were people that they knew did not live in the district that still had voted in the district. As a matter of fact, we knew of one particular individual that for sure we knew they had moved, and I'll separate from why I know. We can talk about that maybe offline. But we knew that this particular individual had moved, but yet they still voted. So we went back and checked. The requirement, the statute is that this Division of Elections, they get the chance to assume that unless you have told them you have moved, that you still live in that district. Well, we did a real quick deal. We went and had one of our guys check for homes that had sold prior to the election. and they only went back 11 months. In that, they compared that with the voter rolls, and we were able to find out from there. We took that, and we were able to then look at the deeds, which is at the recorder's office. It's with DNR. It's public record. And we were able to find 50 people who did not live in the district, had moved out of the district, but yet still voted in our district. Some people lived out of state. And how do we know? Well, we could, on the deed it says, Joe Smith, a resident of X place, sells to, right? Anytime we see a deed, it's public information, it's with our recorder's office. And yet the presumption by our own state is that they don't have to have any duty to look and compare and see whether or not an individual is still in. 50 people, 11 votes, 50 people. It can and does impact elections. And it's a simple change that I believe we should look at, because it's the state looking at state information to turn around and determine whether or not an individual should remain or still vote within the district. The third thing that I would highlight is, I've heard a little bit you've touched on, and that is the absentees and, of course, the second signature. Did that impact the election? Well, it's not the sole reason for what I'm about to address, but there's no doubt that it was impactful. Typically in my district, there is around a 3% rejection rate on absentees. This year, the rejection rate was 0.37. That's not a statistical anomaly. That is a substantial change. And so right there, we would have to ask ourselves, was that particular change, which was made as an injunction, of course, by the courts, did it impact the election? They didn't turn around and find another way to ensure that there was security on those signatures, which, as you know, I'm sure, of course, we do not check signatures at the state level. I do believe the municipality does. The state level, we do not check signatures. They didn't turn around and say, in light of the intent of the legislature, since you don't need a second signature, then we're going to require divisional elections to check those signatures. Instead, there was none of that was taking place. And of course, 3% to 0.37, when you have 4,500, give or take, in a district like mine, absentees, is a pretty substantial amount. Can you confirm that those individuals should be voting, or were the people that were voting? And of course, when you bring in the breach that took place and the information that was taken at that time frame, it's an important conversation to have and to investigate. So those are the three things that I wanted to highlight. I know that many people might think that I'm here, well, because of the recent election, because I'm a Republican. I want to make it very clear that these are not things that I put out there because these are conspiracy type things. These are voters that were absolutely either impacted because they were not given their rights, their location had changed. And I want to make it very clear that we did have a person that testified in our court case. And while she said she had given herself an hour to vote, and she had showed up at the first location and then went to the second location and ultimately left, her point was, she said, if I'd gone to the original location, I would have had the time to be able to stay there and vote. Some people have argued, well, then it's her fault, except for she had a daughter who was a COVID-19 responder, who she knew she had to leave and go address a situation with her. And for her, she didn't have the option to add that additional time or make it back later on. And therefore, if she had known, she wouldn't have been disenfranchised. I would also add that even though we only had one that was testified, there's part of the reason for that is because of the fact that we only had a short period of time to find people, and we did that through knocking on doors. After it came out in the media, we had many people start reaching out to us saying, you're right, I didn't know where to go vote. I got confused. I wasn't sure. And add on top of that, that some of the people that went to the second location, remember you had Wayland Baptist, you had the town center, and then you had Beggett. Some people that went back to the town center, because they got there and were confused, they ultimately, we found actually 14 people there, not all from this particular precinct. I think it was 5 from this precinct. A total of 27 voters voted in District 15, of which I believe it was 12 or 14 were from this particular precinct. They did not vote in another district, by the way. It's not like they went west, and there was only 5 in the 3 districts to the west of us. They went to this district, and so these people were confused, and in the process, some of them voted question ballots, which means that they were deprived of their opportunity to vote for the Senate and the House candidates on the state level. So I bring these up because people were either disenfranchised, or in some cases, people voted in districts that the Constitution does not give them the ability to vote in. They can still vote federally. And then finally, the impact that we know took place because of the dramatic change that was made in a short time frame in not allowing those signatures. Those are all 3 things that I think have to be addressed and that we experienced in our race, and these are recent. That I feel that what is important for the committee to understand and know, and I appreciate the opportunity to address them. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer any.
Thanks, Lance. I do have a couple real quick because how this is a public record and press will, of course, report on it. One of the things I know was mentioned, and you kind of highlighted it, but I want to kind of get it out there more clearly, more in depth perhaps. Not a long explanation, but we said, well, you only had one person. That's all you could find to testify at the court trial. But if you were, as I'm listening to this now, it sounds like it was clearly a lot more than that based on the time that was available. And it's after the fact, and I want to put out the public record too. We reached out because of other information we thought might be germane, and this what we're discussing now flowed from a different conversation that we did not expect. So, but it is germane to put statistics, and facts out there for people to read. And so, without getting into the whole explanation again, but if you were to just say it's not really one person because of the limit that was put on you, and if I remember right, the judge said, well, you can tell me if I'm wrong on this or get it more correct. Well, something happened here, but we don't have time to worry about it. And I didn't know Justice had a timeline to get it right for elections. So can you just highlight again what the number of people you found when you probably said, okay, that's enough? Just give us a rough number for the record. And how did the judge, I don't know what the right word is here, how did the judge handle that and say it? Because it seemed like it was more of we just don't have time to deal with it.
Yeah, so 2 points to that. One is the number of people that reached out to us. And of course, after the deadline, I'd say it probably amounted to maybe about 10 to a dozen that reached out. But there's a separate piece that I think is important, and that is to analyze what we believe based on historical numbers, how that particular influenced how many people potentially did not vote. And that is a little bit more in depth. Of course, we had our expert was Randy Bruduk. It is in public. It was submitted. And what he did is he analyzed our precinct and 915, and used 2 other precincts that were nearby that he felt were similar, and he felt that way because of his time working on redistricting. And he compared those 3. And he also had to make a shift for which was the state attempted. Actually, in their argument, they argued that it was he was incorrectly making this statement. But I believe he was absolutely right. He was highlighting that the type of election was different. That in the past elections, if you looked at the early vote. The early vote was typically won by the Democrat by 60-40, something to that level, maybe 65-35. The absentee was the opposite. You had about 60-40, but in this case for the Republican. Whereas on the day of, I typically would get, in my case, it was usually maybe 50, 51%. This election was completely different. This election, the absentee then became a 65-35 to the favor of the Democrats. In my case, I actually won the early vote by a very slight margin. And then I won the day of at a 65-35. So he had to make the adjustments on what were Republicans impacted and in also not just were Republicans impacted, what does that mean for the number of people that would have shown up? And he came to an estimate of around 57 people were disenfranchised and not able to vote, Republican, Democrat, independent, it didn't matter, that they potentially did not end up voting based on the historical numbers from this particular precinct. And it was the lowest turnout precinct on day of, which is, while it's not always the highest, it's been several cycles since it was the lowest. It's usually, there's usually 2 or 3 others that were below it. And so there were people that were impacted by this move, whether they just gave up, whether they were confused, whatever it may be. We know that there were some because they ended up reaching out to us. But the full spectrum of all of those individuals, we estimate 57, but I can't say that definitively because I don't have 57 people. We had about 10 to 12 people after the deadline that reached out to us and said, I was impacted, my father was impacted. Different people came out and said, we were impacted, and we didn't know that there was someone to go to, but we read about you in the paper, it was in the media, and so, and at that point, there was nothing we could do to bring it to the record to highlight that there were more than just the one that ended up testifying.
And very briefly, just for the public record, Lance, can you, if it's wrong, please surmise it correctly or summarize it correctly, the statement of the judge as far as, you know, what that ultimate decision was on why not to pursue it further or to do anything else with it?
I don't have that right in front of me, and I want to be very careful because I don't want to say inappropriately what the judge said, whether I agree or disagree with the judge. I don't want to say inappropriately, but ultimately, I believe that there was a feeling that the impact to the election was not enough to change the election, because I believe it's because we couldn't present additional evidence, which was the time frame scenario, and so I believe that's probably what I want to make sure. Is that what you were asking?
It's close enough, yes. I just want to make sure that was the impact, because it seemed to come out that time was the factor here, and my interest as far as discussing it is, I don't think justice really has much of a timeline there if we're trying to get the truth and an answer. So that's why I wanted to see if you disagree with that or if that made sense. I am fascinated by the statistics. 3% to 0.37 is statistically an issue based on the numbers you're talking about, and that's a lot of what we're searching for here, is to try to find information of things that have happened, because we have gotten, there's nothing to see here, nothing wrong, everything is great. And as you can see through the testimony for the last hour and 45 minutes, that is in fact not the case, and there's plenty of things that we need to be looking at and perhaps working on. So that was why I asked you to come in, and I think you did that, but I'd like to open up the committee. I know we're a little late, but if we have any questions. Senator Ramble?
First of all, Representative Pruitt, it's great to see you. So I just wanted to say thank you for highlighting this today. It was very intriguing, and I'm really, really glad we got to hear directly from you. And thank you for stepping up and going through the process regardless of the outcome. I'm sure you're a better man because you went through the process and you stood for what you believed in. I just want to say thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And I will say, again, for the record, Lance, I want to make that clear from this conversation, because I know, again, false accusations and things out of context will fly, but you were invited here because of the information you had presented from your court case and that data. This has nothing to do with, so it's on the public record, the past election. What happened, has happened is done. That's not the issue here. We're trying to find data and information so that we can try to make things better moving forward. So that has been said. It's here on the record. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. I am here not because of the election. I'm here because the people deserve to make sure that election integrity matters, that they have the ability to vote, and that they have the ability to ensure that the law carried through, that the Constitution is followed. That's why I'm here today. I wasn't here to dig up old things with the election. That's passed. It's done. Obviously, you guys are seated. That's okay. And the world is how it is. But going forward, we need to ensure that the people have integrity and that they are given every opportunity to ensure that their voice is heard.
That was the point, Lance, and thank you for that. I just want it on the record so when people try to say it's taken out of context moving forward, we can point this out. So I appreciate your time today, and I really appreciate the staff and the committee and Lance, everybody, Dr. Rampton, for being a little bit late. I knew we had a pretty heavy lineup today, but this was important data. So thank you all for the indulgence of that, and thanks again, Lance, for showing up. Take care of yourself. It is good to see you. And with that, I'm going to get back on script here. Thank you to everybody for those presentations today. There's no further action for our committee. For the record, next State Affairs Committee meeting will be this coming up Tuesday, February 16th at 3:30 p.m. We'll hear invited testimony on SB39 election integrity. If we have something else, which we might, we'll go ahead and reference that, or we'll notice it. Seeing no further business before the committee at this time, we will now adjourn at 5:17 p.m.
Wow. Really do love these kind of days. All right, give me just 1 second here. I'm going to make some noise. Turn off my squawker in my ears. Thank you all for joining us here today. I know I put a big, huge list of bills that were supposed to be heard today. This came directly off of our alaskaledge.gov's website, and this was supposed to be scheduled meetings. These were all the bills that they had listed there to be heard, all the constitutional amendments and whatnot. And today they only heard SB39 was the one that they had chosen out of that list to talk about. They had 4 presenters there today. This is a must-share for Alaskans to see. Definitely need to be hearing about voter integrity, what we're looking at. This has, and I'll emphasize this point, this has nothing to do with the current election that we just went through here in November. This has started many, many years ago. Some of this stuff has been going on for 4 years or longer. The bulk of what we're seeing right now has been 2 years in the making. So all of this information and stuff that you're hearing right now has nothing to do with the election that we just went through or why they're looking to change to get voter integrity for our elections here in Alaska. These are things that have been needed for a very long time to strengthen our voter laws, make sure that our voter integrity of our elections is impeccable, unhackable. I mean, we have a 105% voter registered here in Alaska, 105%. Now, if our voter rolls were clean, that would be closer to 80% of our population would be on the voter rolls. Because that's about the normal statistical amount that you'll find in any state that does clean up their voter rolls. They have about a 70 to 85% voter rate or registered voters within their state. They never have 100%. They never have 105% like we hear in Alaska. And so 25% of those that are registered to vote are on that need to be removed for one reason or another. One of the speakers, or one of the legislators that was in the room listening to it today, admitted that they're still receiving applications and ballots in the mail for their children who have moved out of state. They're no longer here. They're unable to vote, but they still received them in the mail. So this is something that we really all should be concerned about and looking into and hoping to get this uncovered and corrected so that we can be sure to be safe and secure within our future elections. I mean, they showed in many cases that you could be getting double, triple ballots going to the exact same person, only because in one they put a J for their middle name, and then the second time they put John down for their middle name, and the next time they did their application, they didn't put no middle name at all. So now we got 3 different names all coming to the same address, but it's the same person. We have many instances of these kind of things here in Alaska. We even in this last election had several people that had double voted, and I believe in the case with Lance Pruitt, one of the people that was rejected in the end as a vote was because there was a double vote from the exact same person that had happened. None of these cases ever get criminally charged. They always give good excuses like, oh, I didn't realize that I had already mailed it in, and I didn't think I had done that, so I filled it out and mailed it in again. Those kind of excuses, hard to prove, hard to disprove, just got to live with the results. It was caught. Voter felons, whether or not they're on our register or not, people that have moved out of state, people that are in districts and have moved into different districts. Let's say you owned a home in Anchorage and you bought one out here in the Valley, but you're still registered to vote in the district in Anchorage, but you're not out here in the Valley. And those things need to be corrected. You sell your home, and you move somewhere else, buy another home, you got to re-register where you're at, but they got to be removing you from where you used to be. This is what they mean by voter integrity. Don't believe what the far left mainstream media out there is trying to push, and they're going to try to spin what happened today into something completely what it is not. So please share this video, get it propagated out there. Alaskans need to hear the truth about SB39 and what this bill is trying to do to clean up our elections and strengthen the voter integrity so that we can be assured that we are having a safe and secured election, and elections are not just being stolen away. I mean, they pointed out that Bryce Edgman won his election by a flip of a coin. Heads or tails, who wins that race? That's how close our races are here in Alaska. Well, imagine 2 felons had voted in that race, one on each side. Those 2 felons canceled each other out, basically, if they were caught, but they weren't caught. But now just imagine only one felon voted, but didn't vote in the other one. Well, now guess what? That one person just won. They didn't need to flip the coin, but someone illegally voted, and they got away with it. I myself this summer documented a felon voting in our elections. He voted 10 times over 9 years. In our elections until it was finally caught. He voted in every single one. His vote canceled out a legal voter. He convicted felon that will never in his lifetime gain back his voter rights because of the particular crime that they had done. These kind of things need to be cleaned up. They need to get our voter registry cleaned up, that different things like that, ID laws they're now saying you're going to have a vax identification card just to be able to travel, to be able to go to sporting events, to be able to go to events at all. And it's kind of ironic that they call it racist or voter suppression when you ask for an ID when you vote, but now you're going to have to carry a vaccine card around with you to be able to do anything. So it's kind of the double standards here, just kind of pointing out the hypocrisy behind all that. Don't forget to like and share. The Facebook squills on you if you don't, especially if you leave a comment. And go to my website, Politadick.com. Click that support button. Every penny goes right back into making sure that I can be here when these important things are going on so that I can live stream them to you. The more you donate, the more likelihood that I'm able to show up to assembly meetings in areas that I don't live, like having to travel to Anchorage. If I have the money to be able to afford the gas to get there, I'll do my best to try to make some of those assembly meetings so that they can be live streamed and we don't have to be dependent on cutting out feeds or them not being able to get the equipment up and running. I'll be there to stream it all live to everyone, uncut, unchecked, catching it all as it is happening. Is the best way to be able to do it. It always seems to put them on guard when they see other cameras that they know are live streaming everything nonstop and won't be cut off when something is being said that they don't like. Let's see, what else? Today is my special day. My kid kind of kidded with me a little earlier today and says, on your special day, you got to be in your special day suit. I told her real quickly that I was going to be in a video later on, which I'm in right now, and to be in that video, I definitely needed to have my clothes on. So if you are looking for a reason to go to my website, Politadick.com, and clicking that support button, think of it as a gift to me on my special day. It is Most appreciated. Like I said, every penny goes right back into expanding what we do. It's bought microphones. It's bought this TV. It's bought new laptops. It's bought wireless mics. It's got some cell phones. It pays for the website. It pays for the cell phone service. It pays for the high-speed internet here within my home. It's paying for the construction on this studio that I'm building in here. Soon it'll be paying for a podcast system so that I can be able to start doing that here within the place too. And these are the kind of things that your donations go directly towards, and helps us expand video editing equipment, that software that we've been wanting for a long time. It's just financially out of our reach. But with your help, your support, we can get those things, and we can improve what we're producing out there. Start giving you shorter, more clipped videos, even though I will guarantee you I will always be unedited and unclipped and uncensored, until they take me off of the air. So that's what I promise all of you for here on out. Y'all have a great afternoon and have a great day. I am going to go pull my lasagna out of the oven. It is my special dinner for this evening. And you guys all have a great night.